Scream 7 is finally out in theaters, and I've been waiting for this one for a long time. It also feels like a while because Scream 5 came out January 2022 and Scream 6 came out March 2023. I mean, that was like a year apart. But before we go into Scream 7, let's do a quick recap because context in this franchise matters. Scream 1, as everyone knows, is a classic. The 1996 movie is famous for being a horror comedy hybrid. It's deeply meta, and it essentially set the standard for a new generation of horror comedy. Scream 2 was a solid follow-up. Scream 3 leaned into the meta quality even harder. It was a bit more silly. Scream 4, I honestly forgot exists. I had zero interest in it when it came out, and I think most people feel the same way. It tried to establish new characters and couldn't stick that landing. Then came Scream 5 in 2022, just titled Scream, like the Halloween reboot, which was a genuine fresh start. It introduced Sam Carpenter, played by Melissa Barrera, and her sister Tara, played by Jenna Ortega, alongside Mason Gooding and Jasmine Savoy Brown. They tied Sam into the original mythology by making her Billy Loomis's daughter. A smart move that connected the new generation to the old one without being held hostage by it. Jenna Ortega was great, the chemistry was real, and it felt like the franchise finally had a new blood worth following. In Scream 6, I also really enjoyed. I saw this in New York City, and it took Ghostface to New York City. This was a great switch up. The geography of the kills, the use of an apartment building, Ghostface in a crowd, in a subway. It was visually fresh and exciting in a way the franchise hadn't been in years. The mythology of the killers tying back to Scream 5 also worked. Scream 6 did have momentum. And then everything fell apart behind the scenes. Melissa Barrera was fired after a social media post. I think the next day, Jenna Ortega announced that she was leaving too, though she later clarified it wasn't just scheduling conflicts with Wednesday. She said the Melissa situation was happening and everything was falling apart. Christopher Landon, who had been brought in to direct, then quit after he started receiving death threats related to Barrera's firing. It was just a complete disaster overall. So they handed the film back to Kevin Williamson, the man who wrote the original Scream, and brought Neve Campbell back as Sidney Prescott. She was paid $7 million to return. And this is where the fatal flaw of Scream 7 begins, because refocusing the entire film on Sidney is, in my opinion, the worst decision they could have made. Sidney is a boring character at this point. Everything that can be done with her has been done. The film sets her up living in a small town called Pine Grove with her husband Mark, played by Joel McHale, and her 17-year-old daughter Tatum, named after the original Tatum from the first film, which is a cute detail but ultimately feels more like the movie patting itself on the back than anything meaningful. And right there is the core problem. The movie is constantly patting itself on the back. The deepfake and AI angle in this film is such a missed opportunity. The conceit that someone is using deepfake technology to make Sidney think previous killers like Stu Macher are still alive sounds interesting on paper. It also sounds kind of ridiculous, but the execution is embarrassing. There's several scenes in this movie where Matthew Lillard appears via what looks like a Zoom call, acting like a returning villain, and I genuinely laughed out loud. It looked like a Zoom cameo. The AI angle is used purely as a nostalgia delivery system, a way to get old faces back on screen with zero actual commentary on how terrifying deepfakes really are. For a franchise that built its entire identity on being smart about the genre it's operating in, that's an unforgivable waste. The film also commits one of the oldest Scream sins. It's obsessed with pointing at suspects. Past Scream movies would let you guess. This one constantly nudges you. What if it's this guy? What if it's that guy? And it becomes exhausting. There's a moment where Tatum's boyfriend, Ben, has a whole scene where he's caught acting like a killer on his laptop. He's doing a full unhinged monologue about ripping Sidney's guts out. And his explanation is that he was just testing whether a deepfake was possible. That's his excuse. And I was joking with my brother, who I saw this with, like, oh, that's a great fucking boyfriend. Like, doing a whole killer monologue and then, like, deep faking it. But the movie presents this as a legitimate plot beat and expects you to just accept it. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then there's the reveal, one of the worst in the franchise's history. The killer reveal, which I'm going to spoil right here. So if you haven't seen it, I mean, I would shut this off now. So the killers in this turn out to be a random doctor and his patient, who happens to be Sidney's neighbor. She's been introduced before in the movie, and I even was thinking she might be the killer. She's acting too innocent. There's just no satisfying connection to the story, no earned motive, no campy logic that at least makes you go, okay, sure. In Scream 1, it was the boyfriend. In Scream 2, it was the killer's mother. In Scream 5, it was Sam's boyfriend. Predictable, but it worked because it mirrored the first film. And in Scream 6, the killers were directly tied to the mythology of Scream 5. Every one of those films had a connective tissue. This one has nothing. It feels completely arbitrary. And it makes me wonder if in the process of writing this movie, the writers ended up, accidentally settling for the most boring choice because they didn't want to make it too predictable. It's just so frustrating because the reveal for these killers is so empty. Like in Scream 6, I didn't think the killers were anyone really memorable, but at least there was this unhinged quality to it. Again, like I was saying before, I was like, okay, sure. This is just fucking stupid and boring. What makes this even more frustrating, though, and painful is that there are genuinely good elements being wasted. McKenna Grace has a death scene that's legitimately great. She's playing a character named Hannah, rehearsing for a school play on a harness, and Ghostface slashes her mid-air. It is inventive, it is brutal, it is exactly the kind of kill Scream should have more of. And then McKenna Grace is gone. That's the pattern with this movie. Every time it shows you something promising, a new character with energy, a creative kill, a moment of tension, it immediately loses the thread. Mason Gooding and Jasmine Savoy Brown show up about halfway through. And when they walked on screen with Courtney Cox, I thought, this is the exact problem. The characters who should be carrying this franchise, the ones built up over Scream 5 and 6, have been shoved to the side so we can watch legacy characters repeat the same beats we've seen a dozen times. And introducing a teenage daughter for Sydney this late in the game, we don't have the emotional history with Tatum to care about her being in danger the way we need to. The film is also just visually dull. Scream 6 reinvented the palette, New York City gave it texture and energy, Scream 7 looks like a mid-budget TV movie. And for all its attempts to manufacture tension, it's simply not scary. A guy in a Halloween mask with a knife stalking teenagers in a small town was terrifying in 1996. But in 2026, when this movie is already gesturing at AI and deepfakes, having its big tension device be a curfew so that when Tatum runs down the street screaming, no one's around to help, it feels completely outdated. And the worst offender, it's just not scary. One more scene that captures everything wrong with this movie, Sydney gets a FaceTime call warning her that Tatum is in danger at the high school. She runs to her car. Of course, she doesn't have her keys, so she just sprints across town. At the beginning of the film, she calls the police immediately when something's wrong. But at this moment, with her daughter's life on the line, it never occurs to her to call anyone. She just runs. It's lazy, it's sloppy, and it's indicative of a script that needed several more passes. Look, I didn't have an awful time. I saw with my brother who's seen almost every Scream movie with me, and there's a comfort in that shared experience. It wasn't painfully boring like some movies like The Strangers Chapter 1. It was just limp. It has no fire, and the reason it still broke franchise box office records its opening weekend, the entire budget back in 2 days, is both impressive and depressing. Because it proves that this franchise can keep producing mediocre movies and people will keep showing up, which means nothing will change. So what would actually fix this? Here's what I think. Completely reboot. Don't just recast, rethink the tone. Keep the meta horror comedy DNA, but take a real break from every legacy character. A new setting, a new voice, new energy. The Carpenter sisters were the blueprint for what that could be like. If Spyglass hadn't imploded that storyline, we might have been in a really interesting place heading into this film. Instead, we got a course correction that corrected nothing. Scream 7 is currently sitting around 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, and honestly, that tracks. It's not the worst movie ever made, but for a franchise that has always prided itself on being smarter than the genre it's in, this is embarrassing. It's flaccid, it needed to take risks, and it took none. If you're a diehard Scream fan, you'll survive it, but you'll walk out frustrated at what it could have been.